Hi, welcome back. It's Natalie flyGIRL Kelley, and I wanted to talk a little bit about pilot lingo. I received a question after my last video, which was regarding picking up IFR clearances with something called ISCRAFT. And someone asked me a question, what was ISCRAFT? And it just never occurred to me that someone might be watching that didn't fly IFR and use this acronym. Pilots love using acronyms, and the FAA and everyone involved in aviation, there are so many acronyms. So I want to back up a little bit and assume that you don't know what that is and give you a little bit of background as to where that came from and why we need that. In the aviation world, there are two types of flying that you can do. One is called under VFR, Visual Flight Rules, and one is called IFR, Instrument Flight Rules. What that means is someone in perhaps a small single-engine airplane can take off and fly under VFR, which means they don't have to talk to air traffic control because VFR means Visual Flight Rules. They can see. There are no clouds, or very few clouds. They can see the ground, they can fly around without having to get into any kind of airspace where they have to talk to air traffic control. They can just fly from point A to point B under Visual Flight Rules. They can see the ground, they can see everything that's ahead of them. That's a basic understanding of what VFR is. IFR is something called Instrument Flight Rules, and that is when you have instrument meteorological conditions. It's a mouthful. That means that someone can take off even in a small single-engine airplane, but perhaps it is not Visual Flight Rules. There are clouds that you have to enter into, and you need to be talking to someone with air traffic control so that they know where you are and they can make sure you stay out of the way of other airplanes and stay safe. That's a basic understanding. Now, commercial airliners that we typically know of almost always fly under IFR because mainly they will always be under the watchful eyes of air traffic control, whether they're in Visual Flight Rules or in the clouds. And if you're flying from New York to Los Angeles, you're probably going to have all kinds of weather along your route. That's quite a span of space. So you may be in visual conditions at some point and you may not be. You may be in instrument conditions. That's kind of a basic understanding as to what the two types of rules are. You have a choice when you're in a single engine airplane and you're flying perhaps a Cessna 172 to fly on days when it's just VFR and you never have to talk to air traffic control, and that is perfectly fine for many pilots, and they do that a lot. They don't talk to air traffic control. There are times when you do need to talk to air traffic control, or you want to talk to air traffic control because you want them to know where you are and help you avoid traffic or give you the best route to your destination. And that is where ISCRAFT comes in. When you pick up a ISCRAFT or a clearance, you use ISCRAFT that tells you what your instructions are basically with air traffic control. You get that before you take off or before you enter IMC, instrument meteorological conditions, or you simply want them to route you and you want to be under the control of air traffic control. Another reason you may fly IFR is if you are going to enter airspace where they require it. There are certain airspace areas, I'll say, that you need to talk to air traffic control. You have to. Those are marked on aeronautical charts. Pilots can see those and know when they're going to enter those areas and know that they have to either avoid those areas or they have to talk to air traffic control. Think of these as busier airports, something like Nashville or Cincinnati, Chicago. They're going to have an airspace restriction where their area is marked. You have to talk to air traffic control because there's just too much traffic. It's too dangerous. Hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. I'm not sure if it does, but maybe I can go into more detail about airspace and IFR and VFR in a different video. But what I wanted to address was ISCRAFT and what that is. That is something you get when you are going to be flying IFR. You want to talk to air traffic control, or you need to talk to them. So as I mentioned, CRAFT is an acronym. I'm going to break it down. The CRAFT, C-R-A-F-T, we'll start with C. That is your clearance limit. That is where you are limited to go to, and that's typically another airport. You're flying from one place, let's say Dallas, Texas, to Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're probably going to be cleared, the clearance limit will be Tulsa, Oklahoma. Occasionally it may be like a GPS fix somewhere along the route. That is your clearance limit. That is the C portion of CRAFT. Then you have the R, that is the route. That's the route you're given to get to that point. We use GPS a lot. We also use other navigational aids when we're flying IFR. It's basically a map, but there's little points along the map or your route to get to your final destination. Your route may be fly to this point, to this point, to this point, and then to your destination. That's just kind of a brief synopsis of what the R stands for in CRAFT. Then you have the A, and that is your altitude. That is what you're cleared to. They give you, usually initially when you're flying out, something like climb 3,000, expect flight level 250, 10 minutes after departure. That means you can fly up to 3,000 feet, and then you can expect them to clear you to flight level 250, which is 25,000. At that point, you typically have filed something. You've requested an altitude, you've requested a route, you've requested, what your clearance limit's going to be, your destination. The altitude is very important because it is used a lot in calculating how much fuel you're going to use. The higher you can climb, the better on fuel management. The F stands for frequency, and your frequency is how you're talking to air traffic control. You have a radio, you're talking to someone on a frequency. Your first frequency will be a departure frequency, which means, let's say I'm flying out of an airport near Cincinnati. I'm talking to Cincinnati air traffic control. I will be given the Cincinnati departure frequency. Those are the people that are going to hand me off to the next frequency. You'll get that from the previous frequency. So they're always going to give you your first kind of initial frequency that you need to talk to, and that is what the F stands for, frequency. T is for transponder. We have these things in the airplane that basically help ATC know where you are. You're giving a very specific code for your airplane when you are flying, so that one ATC controller passes you off to another, and they all know exactly where you are because of this identifier you've been given. And it's typically, actually, I think it's always 4 numbers. They're going to say squawk 4321. And that was an easy one. Squawk 6577. And you put that in your transponder, and it usually stays that way your entire flight. Occasionally they will change it on you depending on the needs of air traffic control. Hopefully that helps you somewhat get an understanding of what CRAFT is, where it came from, why we need it, and what I was talking about in that previous video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure you subscribe and share, and let me know if there's another video you'd like me to do. That is how I got the idea for this video. It was from a previous video I made. Someone was like, explain this to me a little bit more. Here you go.